Hurry, there isn't much time. You must watch the next few videos to learn how you can raise your own errors, how you can log the errors so they never stand a chance. I see that you have your sword drawn, but are you ready to handle the errors? I say again, please hurry. Watch the next few videos while there's still time to fight the great errors and keep them at bay. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video. As the introduction might have led you to believe, today we're going to be talking about how to raise exceptions and how to log errors. And we're also going to be talking about debugging your program. So really the next 3 videos are going to be focused on errors and how to deal with them. Errors that you can expect to happen in your code, and also what to do when you run into errors you've never seen before. So this video is going to be about raising exceptions, and we talked about try except in a previous video, right? So wrapping the code you're going to run in a try block, and then you have an except block that runs anytime the try block runs into an error. Well, with raising your own exceptions, when you're inside of the try block, you'll actually be able to intentionally throw an error, basically, have an error happen, and enter into the except block. So let's jump in and take a look at that. All right, so we should be over in the Google Colab now. And I want to take a moment to explain errors before we go too far into raising our own. Let's just very quickly talk about the different types of errors you might run into. So you have syntax errors, which you've probably ran into before. And basically a syntax error is when you type something incorrect, Python notices it, and throws an error before your program even runs. When you try to run your program, rather. And it might even warn you about it depending on the development environment that you're using. You might get like squiggly lines underneath your code, kind of like I see here, warning me, hey, you've got an error here, and if you try to run this code is not going to work, right? So the squiggly lines underneath your code can sometimes tell you if it's just like when you're in Word and Word underlines with a red line that you misspelled something. Same thing. Okay, those are pretty straightforward. But sometimes we run into runtime errors. So runtime errors occur while your program is running. Makes sense. And generally, there's a few different types of runtime errors. There's several, and we're not going over all of them, but just to give you a list of some of the different types of errors you might see, runtime errors. If you ever tried to divide by 0, that's actually an issue. You can't do that. So that results in a division by 0 error. And the actual error type that comes up is 0 division error. And there's several others. I'm not going to read them all out, but feel free to pause now and read them if you'd like. Okay, so we've got syntax errors. Type something wrong. I could mistype print. Well, if you type PRIN, it's not going to work. And then you've got runtime errors. So things that just happen, they're not, syntactically, result equal 10 divided by 0. There's nothing syntactically wrong about it. It's an issue when you try to actually run and execute that code. Okay? Now, in the past, we talked about try and except. And the reason why you use try and except was so you could try to catch errors when you run your code. That way your program doesn't crash and you can keep running and going through and doing other parts of your program, right? So if I try to run this code, result equals 10 divided by 0, this print line will never run, right? Because I hit the zero division error. Just a quick recap on try except. And so now down here, if I put the result equals 10 divided by 0 inside of a try block, we know that the try block will catch that error and enter into the except block. And if we run that code, that's what happens. We see that we print out, we ran into an error, but then the code keeps going. It's like, well, anyways, what was the next thing I needed to do? So that's why you use try and except, so that your program doesn't just crash when it runs into an error. Now, here is the really cool thing we're going to talk about today. You can actually raise your own exception. So I say raise your own error, whatever helps you understand it. Technically speaking, when you look at these different error types that happen, these are exceptions. That's why you have try and then except. So the inside of the except block is where you have exceptions or errors, really. Okay? So you can raise your own exceptions, so your own errors, while the code is running. If you run into something where you're like, I think I want to throw an error here and enter into the except block. And it's basically a way of saying, hey, stop running the code in this function and move the program to the except statement or the except block. And exceptions are raised with the raise statement. So you can just use the raise statement, the raise keyword, and a call to the exception function, and put a string inside of that exception function. And that's all you really have to do. So let's say we have a short program here where our bank balance is 100 and we have a try block. And inside of the try block, we have some variable called cost of product, 200. And we just calculate a new balance as, hey, the bank balance, which is 100, minus the cost of the product, which is 200. That would give us negative 100, right? And we just say, hey, if the new balance is less than 0, let's raise an exception that says insufficient funds. And that's really all you have to do. Raise exception, parentheses, put inside the quotes what you want to put, like insufficient funds, a message that is helpful. And then inside of the except block, which I am showing a better way to write it. So instead of just writing except colon, you can write except exception. So the type of the exception as E, so the variable that you're going to reference the exception as. And now this gives me a way where I can actually reference the exception that came in and see what the value was. And just a cool thing you can do, if you wrap the E with str to convert it into a string, you can actually compare it and check, hey, was the exception insufficient funds? And if it was, hey, let's print out a special message, or maybe go run a different function that asks the user to add more money, right? And really, you might look at this code and think, hey, this doesn't make sense. Why don't I just code it in a different way where I don't need to throw exceptions? Maybe I just check inside of the try block and ask them here to add more funds. Well, raising the exception is a tool in your toolbox, and sometimes you're limited on what you're able to do because you're working with other pieces of maybe another program. And so all you're able to really do is maybe call, for example, if you're using a function that you can't modify, and you're just kind of banking on that function working. Well, if you can raise exceptions, it kind of gives you a way to work around if that function returns a value that you're not happy with. But really, just keep this as a tool in your back pocket. Raising exceptions can be helpful. All right, so that ends talking about how to raise exceptions. It's pretty straightforward. You can also, instead of typing exception, you actually can type in other versions of exceptions where the exception class was overloaded, but I'm not going to burden you with that knowledge right now. but I want you to know that it exists. For the cases for now, I would say just know that you can type in exception and parentheses and type in the value you want to raise, and know that this will tell your program that, hey, jump down to the except block, because we ran into a case where I don't want to do anything else in the try block. Basically break out of this, but and while breaking out of it, also do some extra logic in the exception. Hopefully that was helpful, and in the next video we're going to take a look at logging, which is extremely useful. And maybe so far you've been doing it with only print, but in the next video I'm going to show you something that really will be helpful for you moving forward. No matter what scripts you're writing, or if you go off to become a developer someday, or if you just are writing personal stuff, logging is critical, and it's so important for helping find issues in your code. So we'll do that next. Thanks.